As the neighborhood buzzed with whispers of rebellion, I realized that building my dream pond might drown Karen Whitfield's reign of terror if only I dared to fight. It was dawn when I stood in my backyard, a steaming cup of coffee warming my hands, looking out over the sprawling expanse of grass that I had envisioned transformed into an idyllic pond. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the lavender and pink hues of the morning sky, casting a golden sheen on my little slice of paradise. My heart raced as I imagined the serene pond I yearned for, where my kids could splash and play while frogs leaped from lily pads to the soft bank, a scene lit up by the shimmering light of day. As I smiled, envisioning blossoming water lilies and dragonflies dancing above the surface, I took a moment to mark out the edges of my dream with white stakes, my hands trembling with excitement at the thought of making it real. But my enthusiasm was abruptly shattered when, from across the yard, I caught sight of her. Karen Whitfield, the self-proclaimed queen of our homeowners association, materialized like a storm cloud on her front porch, her arms crossed tight against her chest. The sharpness of her features was accentuated by the morning light, making her look even more commanding, even more intimidating. And just like that, it felt as though the air had turned sour, a chill creeping into my excitement as her eyes narrowed at me, her lips pursed in a disapproving scowl. "What do you think you're doing?" she barked, her voice dripping with authority and disdain. I opened my mouth to explain my vision, to share my excitement, but the words caught in my throat as I was greeted with a dismissive wave of her hand. To her, there was no room for dreams or fantasies in our tightly controlled neighborhood, only the iron grip of rules that kept the chaos at bay. Her stern tone quaked with confidence, a warrior ready to wage battle. Her eyes flicked towards the stakes I had planted with hope. "That's a hazard. Don't you know it will attract mosquitoes and create a breeding ground for disease? Not only that, but it will decrease our property values." Each accusation struck me like a slap after I felt emboldened by my dreams, the weight of her words crushing my spirit and transforming the air around us from warm and inviting to tense and prickly. Suddenly, my simple wish felt less like a harmless aspiration and more like a declaration of war, drawing the battle lines in an ongoing feud against her overbearing ways. I wanted to scream, to explain to her that a backyard pond would create a haven for wildlife and joy for my children. "It's just a pond, Karen." I managed to stammer, my voice unsure, as the warmth of my coffee cup became somehow insufficient against the coldness of her glare. But she wasn't interested in listening. She stood tall, her posture rigid and unyielding. It was clear she had no time for common sense or the dreams of a family wanting to create a home. I retreated a few steps, a sting of frustration rising in my chest as I considered her typical attitude. This was not the first time she had intervened in my vision for my home. Just last summer, she had made a scene about my new fence, claiming it didn't match the historic charm of our neighborhood. Her complaints echoed in my mind. It seemed as if she was waiting for me to slip, to make a mistake she could pounce on, relishing the chance to wield her authority. It was as if my peaceful retreat had turned into a battleground, where every ounce of creativity I possessed was met with her relentless scrutiny. I could see her shaking her head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of her lips, as though she found amusement in my disappointment. "You can't just dig a giant lake because you feel like it," she said, sarcasm lacing her words like poison, pushing me deeper into my anger. I knew in that moment that this wasn't merely about a backyard pond. It was a clash of wills, my desire for a serene retreat against her twisted sense of order and control. As she turned on her heel, dismissing me from her royal presence, I felt an embers of defiance ignite inside of me. What if I did create something even more magnificent than a pond? What if, instead of a small body of water, subject to her relentless scrutiny, I dug a giant lake that couldn't be dismissed or belittled? I envisioned a sprawling oasis that would be impossible to ignore, perhaps a reinvention of my backyard that she couldn't undermine or attack. The thought sent shivers of determination racing through me. My heart began to thump with excitement, drowning out the voice of doubt, as I set down my coffee and grabbed a shovel from the nearby shed. The early morning mist began to lift as I dug deep into the earth, each scoop fueled by a mix of rebellion and unyielding hope. I would turn every corner of that space into a sanctuary of life, a place where my children could learn, laugh, and explore. As I ended the day with sweat trickling down my back and dirt beneath my fingernails, a sense of purpose washed over me every time I thought of Karen's strikes against my aspirations. I wasn't just digging a hole, I was carving out my stand against her oppressive reign. As the sun dipped towards the horizon, draping the sky in hues of orange and lavender, I felt the energy of my backyard shift. Each swing of the shovel sunk me deeper into defiance. Karen Whitfield's bitter words echoed in my mind. "That's a hazard." It was as if the vibrant landscape around me transformed into a battlefield. Every clump of dirt displaced a silent rebellion against her unyielding grip on our neighborhood. She had proclaimed her disdain so publicly, and while I dug, I could feel the watchful gaze of the neighborhood resting knowingly on my shoulders, their eyes flitting toward the witch hunt she was orchestrating. I had chosen not to request approval from the homeowners association, emboldened by my vision of a glimmering oasis where carefree moments would blossom for my kids. Stepping away from the chaos that Karen had completely monopolized, I began to create my own narrative. With each bucket of earth that landed in the wheelbarrow, I envisioned how the water would lap gently against the edges of my masterpiece, and how my children's laughter would weave into the very foundation of my dreams. But with every shovel, I caught fleeting glimpses of Karen across the way, leaning against her porch, whispering harsh words to the neighbors who had either found their boldness stifled or joined the ranks of her buddies, eager to play sidekick to her tyrannical reign. Fueled by the mix of frustration and purpose, I made my way through the neighborhood, talking to anyone who would listen me story tumbling forth with an infectious excitement. Our community deserves beauty, I would tell them, drawing connections between my extravagant lake and the harmony I envisioned buzzing around us like bees in a garden. It became a quest, one that dared to place creativity above the suffocating constraints set by Karen. What was a mere pond to the community's hearts? It was something more an escape, an attraction to vibrant life, where kites floated in the air and frogs serenaded the twilight. Yet all of this seemed to resolve instantly into chaos when, at long last, I had filled my makeshift pond with the first inch of crystal-clear water. I looked down at its surface and felt an exhilaration surging through my chest. My children squealed with delight, their laughter ringing through the air sweetly like a summer breeze. They splashed in the shallow water, their youthful joy radiating from their faces. At that moment, it felt as if I had finally taken a victory lap around Karen's oppressive rulership, but then the quiet joy shattered like glass. Like vultures circling a wounded animal, she came marching down the street with a cadre of her loyal followers, faces twisted into a uniform scowl. My stomach turned as Karen's voice cut through the happiness, ringing out like a clarion call rattling across the lawn. "Unauthorized construction," she boomed, finger pointed like a judge hammering down a gavel. "Turn around and fill in that hole, or expect fines." It sounded as if she reveled in her power, breathing in the sour sweetness of her authority as she stood there, arms crossed like a commander overseeing enlisted soldiers. The guttural weight of confrontation settled heavily in the pit of my stomach as I faced my children, who just moments ago had looked so carefree. Now reality seeped in, and their healed cry of delight turned to confusion, their innocent laughter sucked into the anxious air like water disappearing in a drought. Rain speckled from the darkening clouds above as I glanced at my children's bright faces. I felt my heart stretch as two opposing forces tangled inside me. Vintage signs of confrontation danced in the air, the sharpness of scoring edges piercing through my resolve. My peaceful vision transformed into a battleground, a call to arms against Karen's iron fist. I glanced over Karen's crew, a mismatched collection of neighbors displaying scattered resolve fueled by her coaxing. I could almost hear the subtle nodding of heads in agreement. At her threats, she had woven her hold on this community tight. Steeling myself, I knew I had to lean into this moment of tension. I heard the voices of support bubbling up around me, neighbors siding with my vision, including those who had tired of Karen's iron-fisted control. "We could make it beautiful," one neighbor said. "It could bring the community together." My quiet voice dipped, and my chest puffed out with unheard courage. I stepped forward with a raised chin and exploding determination, ignoring Karen's wicked grin. She wanted to be the dominant force? I would replay her weaponization against me and turn it against her. Little did she know, I was just starting. As darkness settled around us and the fireflies began to emerge, I resolved to dig deeper not just literally, but figuratively. I'd take this fight beyond Karen's threats. I would recruit others who dared to dream, and we would launch an uprising against her stifling authority. United, we could transform our fears into a serene lake, filled with beauty that would drown out her bitterness, and I would not stop until our dreams soaked the ground once and for all. The evening had descended upon the community like a thick fog, the faint buzz of cicadas providing an unsettling soundtrack to the tension hanging heavy in the air. Inside the HOA meeting room, fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting sharp shadows that mirrored the anxiety building within me. As I took my seat amidst a sea of familiar faces, I couldn't help but notice the murmurs of my neighbors, their eyes flicking toward me before hastily averting. The atmosphere felt electric, a battle of wills poised on the brink of explosion. I braced myself. Karen Whitfield strode into the room with the confidence of a general surveying her troops, her brittle laugh echoing against the stark walls. Clutching a thick sheaf of paper, she was clad in her usual power suit, her sharp features emphasizing the disdain she wore like a badge. As she began to read her list of grievances against my pond, the collective attention weighed down on me like a ton of bricks, each word she spoke striking harder than the last. Her accusations were venomous, claiming the pond attracted swarms of pests, ruined our neighborhood's drainage, and potentially decreased property values. Each grievance poured out of her mouth, lined with the poison of fabrication, feeding on the fears of the gathered members of the HOA. I shifted uneasily in my chair, steeling myself against the creeping sense of helplessness. Karen's commanding presence dominated the room, her followers nodding in agreement, mouths forming silent accusations yet to be voiced. I had found my voice and purpose, but each time I opened my mouth to speak, the weight of her bitter smirk stifled me. The crowd was beginning to hive around her, their agreement with her claims a palpable force that almost broke my spirit. I wanted to leap to my feet and counter her tell them that I had not only built a pond, but fostered moments of joy and laughter for my children. But Karen's crafted words hung in the air like dark clouds, blotting out any flicker of support. In that heated moment, desperation coiled around my heart. My mind raced with a new plan, a scheme born out of frustration that could not be contained. What if my pond grew even larger? What if I transformed it into a sprawling lake, a sanctuary where ducks could paddle and children could splash under the golden sunlight? What if I challenged Karen's authority outright and made my vision an undeniable reality? Would that not overshadow her petty grievances and force the community to see her as the true hazard she was? The thought buzzed through my mind with an intoxicating thrill, energizing me with newfound determination. As Karen continued with her diatribe, I closed my eyes for a brief moment and allowed the idea to sink in, the weight of my imagined lake lifting my spirits like a balloon into the sky. I visualized the sheer expanse of water shimmering under the moonlight, the soft croaks of frogs harmonizing with the laughter of my children. I felt fire ignite within, sparking ideas that might only serve to deepen my defiance. With that image etched firmly in my mind, I began to think about how I could rally support not just for my pond, but for this burgeoning vision of a lake that could redefine our community. When the meeting concluded, I sensed an undercurrent of division among the attendees, a slightly wavering allegiance that had begun to shift. Disquiet followed me as I exited, their chatter a whirl of confusion and concern about not just my pond, but the underlying authority Karen wielded within our neighborhood. I imagined her already plotting her next move, her mind working furiously to secure her control while I quietly schemed for mine. My heart raced. What if I commandeered the narrative and turned her own tactics against her? Instead of hiding from her grievances, I would confront them head-on. In the days that followed, my determination solidified, fueling my desire to begin transforming my pond into a lake that would flourish with life. I pulled together every tool and resource at my disposal. I began reaching out to neighbors who had stifled their voices under Karen's reign. I shared my plans, inviting the brave souls who dared to challenge the status quo to join me in my new quest. The beauty of community began to unfold, the unity of shared dreams stirring hope within us all, blooming like fresh wildflowers in spring. We gathered modicum by modicum of support as I painted vivid pictures of what our lake could bring an escape, a connection, a communal gathering space, where all families could come together without fear of reprimand. I invited my enthusiastic neighbors to envision not just my dream, but a collective oasis that would reshape our neighborhood's identity, shifting focus away from Karen's bitterness. The transformation would be monumental, but it all began with a single act of defiance, a single scoop of dirt turned in defiance of impotent rules. I could feel the tide starting to shift among the neighbors. A few murmurs of approval and excitement blossomed into spirited discussions at every corner I turned. As dusk painted the sky in shades of lavender and navy, I stood with my faithful allies on what would become the banks of our grand lake. With the flicker of fireflies in the air, I dared to dream bigger. Together, we would create a community that embraced beauty and growth, all while thundering against the constraints imposed by fear and control. Hope glimmered through the darkness, stronger than ever, as we prepared to unleash our vision into a reality. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across my backyard as I began the ambitious transformation from pond to lake. The air was thick with anticipation, tinged with the scent of freshly turned earth. With spade in hand, I envisioned a shimmering expanse of water, a sanctuary for my children and the vibrant wildlife I hoped to attract. Each scoop of dirt felt like a defiance against Karen Whitfield, the iron-fisted HOA member who'd done everything in her power to stifle my dreams. But just as I pushed forward with my grand project, the ground beneath me shifted unexpectedly, and my heart dropped. I stumbled back as a low rumble echoed through the yard, dislodging the very foundation of my ambitions. Panic gripped me when I realized I'd inadvertently struck something hidden beneath the surface. With trembling hands, I scratched away the dirt to reveal a network of pipes, glistening in the dying light. I couldn't believe my eyes as I recognized that this was part of the neighborhood's essential drainage system, the very lifeblood that kept our homes protected from heavy rains. My heart raced as I comprehended the magnitude of my mistake. I had jeopardized not only my own property but put my entire community at risk. I dropped to my knees, anxiety gripping my chest as I stared at the disturbing revelation. How could I have been so careless? In my excitement to dig deeper, I had blindly disrupted something crucial without having any idea of the implications. My mind spiraled into worst-case scenarios. Flooded basements and damaging fines could be lurking just around the corner. Suddenly, transforming my pond into a lake felt like a reckless act of insanity rather than a heartfelt endeavor. I thought about giving up, the burden of my reckless ambition crashing down on me like a ton of bricks. Just as despair threatened to take root, a figure shuffled through the twilight. Mrs. Henderson, our sweet but frail elderly neighbor, approached me cautiously. Her silver hair glimmered like the last rays of sunlight, and concern etched deep lines across her face. Seeing my distraught expression, she paused to ask what was troubling me. I quickly revealed my predicament, my voice trembling as I explained my miscalculation. To my surprise, her eyes brightened with understanding, not judgment. "You know, dear," she began, her voice warm despite her age, "Karen doesn't just control this neighborhood with her iron fist. She knows how to manipulate the rules, twisting them to hold power over all of you, especially those who dare to dream." Her words struck a chord deep within me, igniting embers of rebellion that I thought had long since faded. She'll use any excuse to undermine those who challenge her, be it a pond or a wildflower garden. Mrs. Henderson continued, sharing stories of her past encounters, which fueled my desire to confront the very real danger that Karen posed. Rejuvenated by her insights, a spark of defiance flickered within me. It was clear now. This wasn't merely about creating a lakeite, it was about exposing the greater threat posed by Karen and her unchecked authority over our community. Her superficial concerns about property values and hazards only masked her true fear losing the grip she held over all of us. If I had the courage to confront her once and for all, perhaps I could rally others to my cause, becoming a community that refused to be silenced. Torn between the reality of my errant dig and the hope ignited by Mrs. Henderson's stories, I realized that my lake could evolve into a symbol of empowerment. I started sketching plans in the dirt, outlining where the lake could flow, all the while plotting a strategy to expose Karen's dominion. I could dig deeper into the HOA's bylaws and uncover the actual rules that she bent to her will. The challenge would be significant, but so was my newfound resolve. I wouldn't shy away now. As darkness settled around me, wrapping my yard in a soft embrace, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose surge within. I would not let Karen's fear and bitterness dictate my dreams. This is more than just a lake, I whispered to myself, fortifying my determination. I would gather evidence of Karen's manipulative tactics, join forces with like-minded neighbors, and face her at the next HOA meeting. Together, we could rise against her. Hope began to shimmer brighter in the depths of my heart, unearthing a plan that transcended mere property disputes. My vision of a thriving lake would become a crucible for change, a spark igniting a collective stand against tyranny. No more would we allow one person's fear to control our neighborhood. My journey wasn't merely about a pond anymore. It was about reclaiming our community's spirit and lifting the veil off the oppressive rules that confined us starting now. As the sun climbed to its zenith, casting bright rays over our neighborhood, the tension brewing within me mirrored the oppressive heat of the day. It wasn't just the pungent scent of fresh earth that filled my lungs anymore. It was the palpable anticipation of change. Karen Whitfield, our neighborhood's self-proclaimed ruler, wielded her HOA power like a sword, sharp and unyielding. But this was the moment I transformed my frustration into action. My vision of a backyard pond had morphed into a resurrection of community spirit that called for all voices to be heard. I wasn't digging alone anymore. After my eye-opening conversation with Mrs. Henderson, I channeled my anger into meticulous research, poring over not only the bylaws but also digging up tales of Karen's past abuses. Late into the night, under the low glow of my desk lamp, I compiled evidence of her manipulative tactics. I cataloged statements from neighbors she had intimidated, including the time she forced Mr. Thompson to remove his beloved purple door, claiming it was offensive to decorum. I also linked emails where she used emotional blackmail to control the outcome of HOA votes. Each piece of evidence added weight to the narrative. Karen was not merely a nuisance. She was a tyrant disguised as a community leader. With a growing collection of grievances, I reached out to the disgruntled neighbors scattered throughout our cul-de-sac. Over cups of watered-down coffee and pastries at the local bakery, I found allies ready to reclaim our neighborhood. Betty, who had faced off against Karen about her lavender garden, the Johnsons, who had been reprimanded for their overgrown lawn despite the lush green of their neighbor's yard, and even young Ethan from down the road, whose skateboard-turned-chicken coop had drawn Karen's ire. Together we plotted our course. We were no longer a band of isolated victims. We were rapidly becoming a movement. When the day of the HOA meeting arrived, I felt like a lion standing in front of a pack of hyenas. The meeting hall buzzed with chatter, the air thick with apprehension, as our usual cast of characters filled the seats, the committee on one side, Karen on the other, her presence looming larger than life. With hearts pounding and minds racing, we took our places at the front, clutching our papers and evidence like shields. I could feel the weight of our collective grievances pushing us forward, a palpable energy filling the stale air as we prepared to confront the HOA that had oppressed us for too long. As Karen opened the meeting with her usual pomp and authority, I could see the frown lines deepen on her forehead as my group presented our collective evidence. One by one, our voices wove together a narrative that intertwined our struggles, painting a clear picture of Karen's turn from overbearing to tyrannical. I could have sworn I felt the walls of her power trembling under the weight of our truths. Each accusation and anecdote echoed in my chest-of-raised voice, shouted against the blur of her bitterness, and, with each narrative, the tide began to turn against her. And then, just as I saw a flicker of doubt in Karen's eyes, I stepped up, speaking with a firmness I didn't know I possessed. "This is not just my fight," I proclaimed, my voice rising above the murmurs. "We are all affected by Karen's rule. This lake is more than a dream for my family. It represents our collective fight for community ownership. No longer can we allow fear to control our homes." The determination flowing through me felt electrifying, and the community nodding along only fanned the flames of our united cause. Karen's face turned a shade of crimson, her commanding laughter faltering as more neighbors stood in solidarity, recounting their own tales of misery under her watchful eye. It wasn't just about the hazard of my lake anymore. It was about the nightmarish grip she held over our lives. After what felt like an eternity of grievances shared and truths revealed, the board acknowledging our demands at last felt like the dam breaking, unleashing floodgates of hope. Once the meeting concluded, the board voted to make sweeping changes to the bylaws, taking into account not only our voices but also the spirit of true community involvement. We agreed to revoke several of Karen's heretofore absolute powers, establishing a committee that would ensure fair representation and open dialogue in future meetings. Every time I glanced back at Karen, for the first time I did not see a queen. I only saw a shadow of someone desperately trying to cling to a power that had crumbled beneath her. As nighttime descended like a warm blanket over us, I walked home with my neighbors, my heart swelling with renewed hope. My Lakense, a symbol of defiances, now a beacon of community triumph. That very spot, where I had envisioned my children's laughter and joyous splashes, transformed into a gathering place for block parties, community picnics, and heartwarming chatter. The mergers of water and laughter reflected the dawn of a new chapter for all of us, and with every ripple shimmering in the dark, I could feel our burdens easing. Dreams were not just for individuals, they were the collective power of communities. In that moment, I knew my backyard lake might not just quench my ambitions, it would spark the change we had long yearned for.